Hello friends, how are you? It's been a little while since I made a video. I have been immersing myself in just managing, balancing hormones and helping clients and kind of like really doing some really great mindset shifting work of like, if I'm at capacity, I'm not gonna like push and force myself to create content. And now that things are kind of shifting a bit, I taught some really powerful hormone workshops in August. And since that is done, I have energy to put into creating videos again. So today we're going to be talking all about how to start addressing high cortisol, aka adrenal fatigue. First though, make sure you hit that subscribe button, like this video if you like this kind of content. I always get such a positive response when I share content about cortisol, your stress hormone, and adrenal fatigue and adrenal burnout. Probably partially this is because this is one of the most common hormone imbalances I see my clients struggle with. I've gone through this too, and I find this is the first hormone that starts to go off and can start a domino effect of other hormone issues in women and men. And I really work a lot with women on fully overcoming binge and emotional eating and help them identify the roots of their hormone issues and how to start regulating them so they can gain their energy back, release the weight, have better mental clarity, better sex drive, better mood, fertility, all of these things that may be struggling, that you may be suffering with when you have a hormone issue. Hello and welcome if you're new to my channel. My name is Romaniuk and I'm an emotional eating, digestive and hormone expert with 11 years experience helping thousands of women all over the world gain what I call food and body freedom so you can step more into the woman you've always dreamed of being while being in optimal health. So like I said earlier, one of the most common hormone imbalances I see is high cortisol. And I would say about 70% of my clients will have high cortisol. The other 30% will have low cortisol, which is also termed as adrenal burnout, and adrenal fatigue is when the cortisol is too high. So now what do we do? How do we start addressing this? How do we even start to like understand if we have high cortisol? And then if I'm saying yes and nodding my head that I have all the symptoms, where do I go from there? Well, today I want to talk to you and give you some insight into where to get started. So the first thing is, let's talk a little bit about the symptoms of high and low cortisol. Please just don't go on Dr. Google and try and self-diagnose your symptoms, because the second thing I'm going to talk about is hormone testing. You've got to get your hormones tested to get the actual numbers and the actual reads from your body to know whether it's too high, too low, or if it's in a good place. And you know, your numbers are really going to dictate the kind of protocol and the support that you're going to need. And it's, you know, as we dive deeper into this, you're going to hear, if you haven't already listened to some of my other content, that it's not just as cut and dry of getting a test done, taking a supplement. It usually goes a lot deeper. So some of the most common signs of high and low cortisol. First sign is fatigue and exhaustion. The more tired you are, the more likely you are to have a cortisol issue. Now, cortisol is your stress hormone, so the more stress we've had, we've been through really stressful circumstances, traumatic situations, if we're emotionally eating, binge eating, fighting with our body and our weight, dieting and restricting, and then falling off and overeating. There's so many things that can stress us out. But the first sign of high cortisol is fatigue. Okay, you're tired. Even if you sleep 8 to 10 hours a night, you wake and you're tired through the day. You're having afternoon energy lulls. That's one of the most other common symptoms. Brain fog, abdominal weight gain. Okay, if you are having trouble losing weight and you're puffy and your face is puffy and you feel like you're retaining water and your rings are fitting tighter on your fingers, these are all signs that your cortisol may be high, because your body's in a heightened stress response. You're in fight or flight, and not just for a few minutes, but throughout your whole day. And this accumulation of cortisol builds up in the body and then can fuel things like anxiety. It can really impact your mood. You can feel more reactive and snappy at people. Small things that you would just usually brush off, you're really taking to heart, or you're really getting reactive about. Oftentimes we have trouble falling asleep when we have high cortisol. As well, we can wake through the night, and cortisol really impacts our blood sugar. So I find it's not just as easy to go between meals without having a snack. Otherwise, your blood sugar crashes, your energy crashes, you feel dizzy, faint, lightheaded, shaky. And if you wait too long to eat and then you get some of those feelings, they're relieved by eating. That's another sign that you may have low blood sugar. And I'm going to link below my Healing Adrenal Fatigue Naturally YouTube video series that I've started here a few months ago. Go and watch all those videos. I do one on blood sugar, energy, and cortisol, and it's going to give you a lot more insight into all that. So I'll make sure that it's linked below for easy access for you. Also, I find a lot of women will have more sensitive digestion when they have high cortisol, but it's going to be the fatigue, afternoon energy lulls, abdominal weight gain, troubles falling asleep, waking in the night, not feeling rested, through the day, the blood sugar stuff, irregular cycles, brain fog, moodiness, anxiety, things like that. And then of course, often what I find is a lot of women will have multiple hormone imbalances. And so there's multiple symptoms kind of feeding and fueling each other. Fun fact, a lot of you may not realize that a lot of acne, the redness and the cystic nature can actually be due to high levels of cortisol in the body. It's very rare to actually see women with testosterone dominating acne. It's usually high cortisol stress hormone stuff. Okay. So one thing I want to mention with appetite, because this is one thing you may also notice, I find a lot of women and men too with high cortisol have increased appetite levels, and that's because your blood sugar is off and your body's in a heightened state of stress. And I find people don't feel satiated really between their meals. They feel too hungry. They're not eating enough. You're not eating enough protein and fat with your meals, or you're not eating enough carbohydrates. And so if your blood sugar isn't regulated and you're not managing stress well and you're not eating enough, you could feel like you're just constantly hungry no matter how much you eat. And that can also be a part of a cortisol imbalance. So if you want to go to my other videos and learn more about symptoms of high and low cortisol, check out the adrenal fatigue series. Like I said, it's linked below, and I want to move on to the second thing we do. So now it's like, okay, you're having the symptoms. Which symptoms are you having? I'm so curious. Leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. I love hearing from you guys, your feedback, your input, your questions. It really honestly just helps me figure out where you're at, what you're struggling with, and what you really need help with, so I can provide you with the content and other resources that I have that could really assist you. So now what do we do? Symptoms, I've got them. Yes. Okay. So the second thing that ideally we need to do is we need to go and get our cortisol tested, and we want to get our morning cortisol tested. I would say the easiest thing to start with is a blood test. You have to go before 8 a.m. fasting for accurate results for your cortisol. Okay, so if you're going midday, you're going, after 10 a.m., you're not going to get an accurate read. If you want to work together to do hormone testing and get things done, including your cortisol, your sex and stress hormones, your thyroid panel, your vitamins and minerals, inflammatory markers, you are welcome to click the link below and book a 30-minute consultation so that we can talk more about your hormones, your symptoms, your gut health, relationship with food, stressors, etc. And then I can talk to you about my hormone testing package, which includes a round of hormone testing as well as an hour session to review everything. I also have bigger programs that you're welcome to come into, but I do have that kind of taster intro if you want to start with some insight and seeing what's going on with your hormones. I go through them with you thoroughly, help you understand the symptoms correlated to the tests, why your levels are off, and how we can naturally bring things into balance using foods, teas, spices, supplements, self-care practices. And we have to look at your lifestyle and your stressors that are impacting your cortisol. But I suggest getting your morning cortisol tested. Now, my big beef with, sometimes just going and getting it done through your healthcare practitioner, your doctor, is that the ranges for normal are far too big. And so you may get your cortisol done and it actually might be high or too low, but if it's in the normal range, they'll just glance through it. They won't even say anything about it. They'll just tell you that your test is normal. And so I think there's a much more holistic range, and it's a lot smaller. And depending on the country you live in, the ranges do vary. But I like to take a more holistic look at it. And 9 times out of 10, if you're having the symptoms, there's usually a cortisol imbalance associated with it. And then we also want to test your thyroid function, women, your progesterone and estrogen, things like that, because oftentimes when the cortisol starts to go off, it will start to impact our thyroid function. It can impact our sex hormones, your fertility, all that kind of stuff. And if you're starting to go through perimenopause or menopause, you've got to get this stuff tested, because I'm telling you, your experience of menopause or perimenopause will be a lot more intense, and there could be a lot more suffering that doesn't need to be there if you're to get your hormones tested and learn how to balance and manage them. And weight gain and, night sweats and sleep issues, low libido, things like that can happen a lot more easily if we already have hormone issues that we never identified before going into perimenopause or menopause, and then it just gets amplified because your body's going through massive changes. So we must get our cortisol tested. If you want to connect to do so, click the link below and we can book a session to connect and talk about doing that together. So that's the next thing. We have to actually know your numbers. And then what we do after we know what's going on with your cortisol is we need to ask the very important question of what caused it to get too high or too low in the first place. We don't just look at the test and throw you on a supplement. We need to know why. Why are the levels off, right? Because it just didn't go off out of nowhere. We don't inherit a hormone imbalance out of nowhere. There's always multiple levels and multiple reasons. So grab your journal. I want you to write some of this down and explore this for yourself. And please comment and share what comes up for you. Some of the most common reasons that I will see women with cortisol imbalances, and men too, are some of the following, okay? So the first thing is you have a lot of things on your plate and your stress levels are too high. Now I know you all have a lot going on and you have many roles you have to play, but the issue is often one of the biggest reasons I see women with high cortisol is actually stemming from a root issue of unworthiness and not feeling good enough. And so what that does is it puts us into behaviors like people pleasing, overbooking our schedules, making ourselves the last priority, spreading ourselves too thin, putting ourselves on the back burner. And if we are last on our list and you're constantly giving to everyone else, that is going to burn out your adrenals and cause a lot of stress response in the body. And that's going to skyrocket your cortisol through the roof. And then you're probably surviving off of caffeine and sugar to get through your day and get a jolt of energy that then is followed by a crash. You're probably not sleeping well. You're probably not getting enough sleep, right? So all of these things I've just mentioned are reasons that would stress out your body and put you in a heightened stress response long-term and cause too much cortisol production. And then what ends up happening for some of you is you're in a stress response for so long, your adrenals, which produce your cortisol, get so tired of producing so much and they start to almost like get depleted. And then the level peaks from being too high and it starts to drop too low. And now we go from a fatigue to a burnout, which is where it's like it feels so hard to get out of bed and the brain fog gets worse and the symptoms keep getting worse and keep being amplified. And we can balance the cortisol, whether it's too high or too low, but what we don't want to do is ignore it and keep pushing and not make the lifestyle changes like dealing with your self-worth issues. If you're the kind of gal that has tied your worth up in how much you do, right? And if you're resting, you feel guilty and you're being hard on yourself that you're not good enough. If you're resting, we've got to deal with those mindsets. These mindsets and these limiting beliefs are literally yelling at you and dictating the way you are or are not taking care of yourself and showing up for yourself. And if you feel more familiar and comfortable doing everything for everyone else and always being busy and you feel guilty resting and you feel stressed resting and you feel like you can never take a break, there is mindset work to do. And that's often what's missed and or ignored because it's the work of discomfort. However, if we want to come full circle and fully experience our hormones in balance and release the weight and improve our gut health, reduce inflammation, gain relief from our symptoms, and truly feel optimal, we cannot ignore and keep leaving out the mindset behavioral work. And that's what I pride myself on in my practice and the work I do with my clients. We do this holistically. We take a mind, body, soul approach and we address the people pleasing, the low self-worth, the negative self-talk, and we also support your physical body, your symptoms, and using things like foods and supplementation and herbs to help along with the lifestyle and habitual changes. They work the best together. You likely won't gain full relief just from supplementation, and it can become a band-aid approach. So we must also address the behaviors. The other things that I see that will definitely keep cortisol high are going to be things like feeling insecure in your body and fighting with your body about your weight. If you're in the weight body battle where every other month you're on a new diet, restricting, cutting carbs, cutting fats, not eating enough, and then you're failing on that, and then you're rebelling and eating all the things you weren't allowing yourself to have, it is very stressful on your entire body, including your cortisol. If you're emotionally eating, binge eating in the binge purge cycle, or have any kind of food addiction or emotional relationship with food where you're using food to cope, that is going to heavily stress out your your body, including your cortisol levels. So we have to address those things too, or you may just find you're continuing to be fatigued and brain fogged and have all the symptoms. It's also important we look at things like your sleep, your quality of your sleep hygiene, how much time are you spending on technology, right? Do you have a self-care practice, and or are you lacking in those things? Are you staying up really late? What are your job hours? Do you work for yourself? Like, all of these things play a role in your cortisol. We also need to look at your caffeine intake, because that will impact your cortisol. And we want to look at your exercise and movement routine, because if it's too intense and there's too much, it can feel really difficult to regulate those levels. Because while I love exercise and I think it's a very important part of our well-being, if you're using it in an unhealthy way, or you're afraid to slow down for fear of gaining weight, there's mindset work to do there. So we must look at all of these different layers. There's many things for us to look at, but this is where we need to start. So symptoms, getting the testing done, and then why are the levels too high or too low? Lastly, with why are they too high or too low, we've got to look at your blood sugar. We've got to look at mineral and nutrient deficiencies. Your gut health is a big one. If your gut health is stressed and you have different issues going on digestively, that is going to stress out your cortisol levels as well. So we want to look at all the body systems and your key organs and how they're functioning. And if there's any issues going on, we must address those and help the body balance to help the cortisol balance. So those are some of the first things we've got to look at and then we've got to do to address high or low cortisol. What is your biggest takeaway? What is the step that you're going to take? Let me know in the comments below. Like I said earlier, there's a whole adrenal fatigue series that I'm going to link, and I'm also going to link my consultation as well as an intro kind of hormone podcast series where I talk more about different hormone functions. And so once you sign up, you'll get the first episodes and you can start listening and building more awareness. So that will be linked below as well. Make sure you are subscribed and let me know what kind of videos you want to see. I'm here to help empower you to food and body freedom, as I call it. And I really want you to understand the layers and the depth of this, but that this is where we have to start. Understanding your symptoms, doing the testing, and getting the proper support to regulate those hormones. Okay. So thank you for joining me today. We'll see you again very soon. Take care.